I've lived in many countries and mixed with many men.
I've shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain.
The fireside evening said we were brothers. The fireside evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend.
My officers had said I must hate him till the end.
But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands.
Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Though words and customs vary like waves upon the sea, one life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers.
Namaste. Thank you very much for coming. I want to welcome you all. I bow to God in the form of our great masters, God in the form of Babaji, God in the form of Yoganandaji, in the form of our beloved Swamiji who has started this work. And I bow to God in the form of each one of you, because God is omnipresent, is everywhere and in everything. Let's pray together, please. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. O Divine Mother, fill our hearts with thy love, our minds with thy wisdom, and fill our lives with thy joy. We are thine, be thou ever ours. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We want to talk this evening on this theme of Paramahansa Yoga, master of East and West, and how he brought these worlds together, and especially what that means in our lives in a very practical way today. Because if yoga, if teachings, if this high spirituality is just something that's different and distant from us, something that belongs to the past or belongs to great masters, that demonstrate that, but doesn't touch our lives and doesn't change our daily actions, then it may be good as a theory, but it's not very useful for what we need in our lives. I want to start a little bit with the history of our particular line of gurus, because it's very pertinent here. There was a time in the far distant past when Christianity was much more mystical than it is now. There was a great tradition called the Gnostics. There were hermits who went into the desert. There were great, great saints who meditated deeply. But Christianity began to go more and more into the direction of organization, of large temples, of lineages and hierarchies. And there was a pope around the 5th century who had a vision, and he was praying deeply to God, asking, isn't it more important that we bring the mystical tradition back into Christianity? And he had a vision in which God told him, no. It is better for Christianity to develop an organizational power and structure and bring that power and structure to the West. And some centuries in the future, it will be time to bring together a mystical tradition and a practical organizational tradition. Now, that happened many, many centuries in the past, and it had, one could say, nothing to do with our lineage and nothing to do perhaps with India. But, my friends, it had a great deal to do with our lineage and a great deal to do with both India and America. Because Yogananda Ji tells us that there was a time, he doesn't tell us when, but he tells us that there was a time when Jesus appeared to the great master Babaji in the Himalayas. And he said to Babaji that now the time has come for the mystical tradition of intercommunion to be reintroduced into the West. This all has to do with a great change of ages. There's a great cycle of yugas. Just as there is a clock that runs around 24 hours, there is a cycle of ages that run around 24,000 years. And it goes from high consciousness gradually down to lower and lower consciousness until at the very bottom is about 500. That's the darkest time of man's consciousness, of his understanding. And that occurred about 500 AD, right about the time that Pope was given that vision and told that the time was not yet ripe for a mystical tradition to come into the West, into Christianity, because it was still the age of form. It was still the age of hierarchy and structure. Man's consciousness was so low that it wasn't ready to understand anything deeper. But now, as we move forward, we are coming out, and in fact have come out of that dark age of Kali Yuga. And it was around the time of the changes of that age that Christ appeared to Babaji. And he said, now is the time to reintroduce into the West the mystical teachings of India. Christ himself was a yogi. I wouldn't be very popular in America in some churches saying that, but nonetheless it's true. He was a yogi. We know that he spent many, many years in India, and he trained here and brought these teachings back to the West. One of Yogananda Ji's primary tasks was to show that the original teachings of Christ and the original teachings of Krishna, as stated in the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, were essentially the same teachings, because truth is one and eternal, and it may have different expressions, but it cannot have different truths. There is only one truth. There is only one God. But now the time of the ages has come when a more mystical tradition, a more of a emphasis on meditation and on inner communion with God is right. And that's right not only for the West, not only for India, but it is right for the world. And that is, to a certain extent, what this line of masters has come to bring into the world. Now, I do not want to be sectarian. I do not want to say that only this line of masters was given that task. That is a little bit like saying that when spring comes, only one garden grows. Well, when spring comes, as it is now in the ages of mankind, there are many, many gardens that are growing and many expressions of this new consciousness. But this particular expression is sacred to us. One could say that this expression, for those of us who are followers of Yogananda or we meditate with his particular techniques, this is part of our spiritual DNA. And so that meeting between Christ and Babaji was very, very important. And that resulted in Babaji calling to him. I have always found this a very strange tale, to be honest with you, that here is a great avatar, and that great avatar is living in Benares, and he has a humble job as an accountant in the British engineering department. Now, to me, that doesn't quite compute that an avatar would take a position like that. But there's a very important reason for it. When Lahiri Mahashaya was in his late 30s or perhaps 40 years old, he had already had a wife, he had children, he had a job, and his office sent a telegram saying that he was posted now to Raniket. And when he arrived in Raniket, there was very little for him to do, so he took to walking around the area in the hills. And one day he heard calling his name, Lahiri, Lahiri, come. And he climbed up Drongiri Mountain. This was in the fall of 1861. He climbed up and he found there a young man who now we know as Babaji, but he didn't know who it was. And this young man said, Lahiri, don't you remember me? And he said, no. Who are you? And then he said, it's beginning to get late. I have to get back to the office. And this young man said, the office was made in English. The office was made for you, not you for the office. Paraphrasing something that Christ had said in the Bible. And then he tapped Lahiri on the chest, and Lahiri remembered his past life in that cave with that bowl, that asan, and he remembered who that young man was. It was Babaji. And then Babaji materialized a golden palace and gave Kriya initiation to Lahiri Mahashaya. After that Kriya initiation, he tapped Lahiri on the chest, and Lahiri went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest state of consciousness, and remained there for 7 days without moving at all. And when he came out, he begged Babaji to allow him to stay there in the Himalayas with that small group of people who were Babaji's disciples. And Babaji said, no, that is not God's will. Now this is very, very important for each one of us who are sitting here. He said there was a reason that you were not called here until you had worldly responsibilities, because it was Lahiri's mission to bring yoga back to the world of people like you and me each of whom has worldly responsibilities. We have jobs, most of us have families, many of us have children, and many of us find it difficult to practice the great teachings that were explained in the Bhagavad Gita or are given to us in the form of teachings of yoga philosophy. It seems difficult in the modern age to be able to grasp that. I don't think I have talked with anyone ever in the history of Ananda, and as Daljitji said, I've been with Ananda now for 47 years, and I have met thousands of people. I don't think I have talked to anyone who has not had difficulty fitting in meditation into their daily routine, or difficulty going deep in meditation, and especially difficulty bringing these principles into their daily life. And that's more what I want to talk about, but let me continue a little bit with the history. So Lahiri was sent back by Babaji to resume his job, to resume his responsibilities, and to give out these teachings. And one of his disciples was Paramahansa Yogananda's father and his mother. Another was Sri Yukteswar, who became Yogananda's guru. And Sri Yukteswar had a particular interest in the West. He read scientific treatises, he studied mathematics and different scientific aspects, and he was interested in the West. And he went to a Kumbh Mela and seeing all the sadhus who didn't seem to be very active and had long hair and dreadlocks and didn't seem to be very uplifted in their consciousness. He thought, aren't the scientists and great thinkers of the West of more value to this planet than these people? Babaji picked up that thought and he called him to him and gave him the task of not only writing a treatise called, what is it called? The Holy Science, in which he showed the parallels between Eastern and Western thought, but also he told him, I will send to you a disciple to be trained and sent to the West. And so it transpired some years later that Yogananda was sent to him. Yogananda was then trained and went to the West. And Yogananda in the West has created an absolute transformation. His book is an autobiography of a yogi, is the most popular spiritual autobiography ever written. As recently as 7 or 8 years ago, it was the #1 bestseller of nonfiction books in Italy. This is over 50 years after its passing. We have a friend who has written a book about the movement of Vedic thought into America. He said that there is not a single teacher of New Age thought or New Age spirituality teaching in the West who has not read and been influenced by that book. It has lit fires in the minds of millions of people in the West. And now, for us, the person that was most important, that it lit a fire in his mind, is Swami Kriyananda, who was a young man, met Master, was trained by him, and given a life mission which has resulted in the creation of the Ananda communities and the Ananda movement around the world. But I want to come back to that idea of Lahiri having worldly responsibilities before he was brought to Babaji, before he was spiritually awakened once again in this life, and then sent back to resume those worldly responsibilities. Because in this change of ages, from Kali Yuga to Dwapara Yuga, there is a change of how we must approach spirituality. There are several things that are very important. One is that in this new age, form is becoming less and less important and less viable. It's as if, imagine an image where someone takes water from a very pure lake and he pours that water into a container, and that container is in the winter time, and so that water turns into ice. And then different ones of those blocks of ice are given to different people, different artists, and one artist carves a statue of Jesus out of the ice, another carves a statue of Krishna, another Shiva, another Vishnu, another Buddha, another some carving representing Islam, and so on. And you have all of these forms, and they're able, because the temperature is low, there's not much energy in terms of temperature in the winter time, and those blocks of ice can stay in that form. And so, after a little time transpires, those artists begin arguing about which block of ice is best, and each of them thinks, mine is the most beautiful. But more than that, my image of Vishnu is more important than your image of Shiva, and fights begin to break out. And as long as those blocks of ice can be moved around and separated, it seems like at least there's the viability of arguing. But now we have moved out of winter, out of the winter of Kali Yuga, and we are moving into the spring of Dwapara Yuga. And those blocks of ice are beginning to melt. And when the water from that melts and begins to pool together, it's very hard to separate that and say, my water is better than your water. My water is more pure than your water. It's all from the same source, and that's what's happening in the world. Now, we still have some blocks of ice, and the people who are attached to their particular block of ice are getting very worried right now. That's why we see so many religious wars and bombings and difficulties with fundamentalists in the world, because they're afraid. The old ways are changing. Their old ways are changing, and that fear produces in them a reaction. But that reaction is going to pass, and one of the reasons it's going to pass is that the world is becoming more and more enlightened, and will become more and more enlightened. As the years and decades roll on, we will begin to see that people, and this movement has already started, that people will begin to say, all religions are fundamentally the same. It doesn't matter if you're of one religion or another. We had a story, there's a very fundamentalist preacher in America, a Christian preacher, and all his life, his name is Billy Graham. He's very popular, has been the teacher to many, many presidents, the spiritual advisor. But he has always held the thought that only Christians are going to end up being able to go to heaven. We have a friend who visited a person who is very close to him, one of the people high up in his organization. And this man told our friend, a member of Ananda, that he had just recently had a conversation with Billy Graham. And Billy Graham told him, you know, the more I see this world, the more I think that everybody who is doing good and loves God is going to get into heaven. Now that's a sea change for that man. And that sea change is beginning to go around the world. And so the world is beginning to change, and Yoganandaji and this line is part of that change. one of his chief missions was to show that the Bible and the Gita in their original forms and original understanding are one and the same religion. And that is going to happen increasingly. So there's a movement of breaking down borders, breaking down form, breaking down separation. That's also happening politically, geopolitically. 50 years ago, the different countries in Europe were fighting each other. They were sending planes with bombs. In our center in Assisi, we have a building there that has bullet holes in it from World War II. And now there's the European Union, and these countries are all cooperating together. In Ananda Assisi, there are people from about 15 different countries living together as brothers and sisters. They don't even think of the separation of political borders. And so that change is happening. Yogananda predicted first there will be a United States, just as there was a United States of America. He said first there will be a United States of Europe, then there will be a United States of Asia, and ultimately there will be a United States of the world. Wouldn't that be nice? Where these countries and artificial borders that seem so silly to the astronauts who are floating in space and looking down at the beautiful marble of the earth, they don't see any borders, any lines, any Google map that says this is India, then this is China, and so on and so forth. All they see is one beautiful globe inhabited by humanity. And that change is coming because separation and form is beginning to dissolve. But now I want to talk very practically, because one of the other things that was happening during Dwapara Yuga will happen increasingly is that the delusion of space will disappear. And we can see that. In fact, this morning, Devji and I sat in our bedroom, took out our computer, and talked with our son in California. And he could have been in the next room, he could have been in the next country, he could have been, as he was, halfway around the world. It didn't matter. We just sat there and talked as if we were sitting together, all three of us. So electronically, space is disappearing. But space is still a delusion that we carry. And I want to talk about the most important delusion of space that affects our daily life. And that is the delusion that God is distant from us, that God is far away. That is the space that we have to break down, because that is the space that is creating the diseases of the world. All disease, all unhappiness, all conflict proceeds from the fact that we feel disjointed and separated from God, from our own Creator, and from each other. And it's that space between us and God that ultimately creates the problems in the world. It's that space that makes us feel separate, that makes us feel self-protective, and therefore greedy, and perhaps violent, perhaps manipulative, all of the negatives, and I don't want to go into those. All of the negatives are created fundamentally by spiritual disease, that God is distant from us. And so the real task of this line of gurus, the real task of Ananda, is to break down the delusion that God is far away. And we have been given specific techniques that help us do that. One of the techniques is Kriya Yoga, but primarily the technique is meditation, because when we still the mind, and the mind becomes less and less restless, and we begin to feel not what is outside of us, but what is inside of us. Then we find that what is inside of us is innately holy. What is inside of us is joy and peace and love and light and wisdom, innately spiritual, innately holy qualities. And through meditation, when we begin to feel those qualities, then our task becomes bringing those qualities into our daily life. And that is why Babaji sent Lahiri back into the marketplace, back into the hustle and bustle and noise and pollution of Benares, because he wanted him to begin to demonstrate for everyone that God is not separate, that God is in our jobs, God is in our family, God is in our life as we lead it. And it's that we have to work on, each of us, in our own way. And so first of all, if we want to integrate the world, we have to begin to integrate our own minds, our own consciousness, our own emotions. And that's what meditation does. Meditation, now we have scientific evidence that meditation changes both the structure and the functioning of our brain. Over almost 80 years ago, Yoganandaji said that meditation changes the cells of your brain. People then thought he was probably speaking poetically, some vague image. But now we have scientific evidence that that is absolutely true. People who meditate are happier, they're calmer, their immune system works better, they are able to maintain a sense of peace and joy where they go. And so if we want to bring God close, let's begin by the practice of meditation, which is the primary practice that we teach through Ananda. But it's not enough to meditate in the morning and then get up and dust off our hands and go out and behave in a way that is disintegrative in the rest of our life. If we're meditating in the morning and we feel peace, then our job is to go out and bring that peace into the way that we address our husband or our wife or our children. Because if we can't hold on to the peace, as Yogananda's chief woman disciple said, our religion is tested in the cold light of day. If our spirituality cannot maintain itself strong enough to be able to change the way we relate to our husband and our wife and our children, then we have to re-examine that spirituality. And so meditation has to be combined with changes in the way we live, with changes in our behavior. One of the activities that we're going to do in just a little while is that we're going to have a book launch. And I have written a book called 30-Day Essentials for Career. And in that 30-Day Essentials for Career, I take one of these qualities or attitudes, the kind of qualities and attitudes that come from contact with God and contact with our own higher self, and I give a short description of an attitude that we can bring into our daily life. And then I give a little practical piece of advice. I call it, try this. Just try this today. And there's one for each day of the month, 30-Day Essentials. And it was a surprise to me that that book was put on the fast track and just released in India about 2 weeks ago. And so at this event, toward the end, we will have the launch of that book and then later on a book signing. But The point here being that meditation, our spiritual life, must be made practical and must be brought into daily life. If we don't do that, subconsciously we say that God is somewhere far away. So is God more alive in your murti, in your meditation room, than he is in your mother when you come out of that meditation room? I don't think so. I think he's more alive in your mother. But you know what the real secret is? The real secret is God is present where we think God is present. Because God is omnipresent. He's equally in the murti and the mother. He's equally in a mantra and a behavior at work. He is everywhere, and it is our job to begin to see him everywhere. And the more we go within ourselves and see him there, and then make the actual conscious attempt to see him in other people, to see him in our daily activities, to see him everywhere. When we do that, then we will begin to overcome the delusion of space in the sense of God being distant from us. And so this is a great, great age to be born in. There's apparently, I've heard, a Chinese curse that says, "May you be born in interesting times." And it's supposed to be a curse. Well, I think it's not a curse. I think it is a great opportunity. And you and I, my friends, have definitely been born in interesting times, and let's make the most of it.
Good evening. I'd also like to share a few words with you. First, I want to thank all of you for coming this evening, and thank everyone who worked so dedicatedly to make this evening happen. There are many, many hours and hours of work that goes into creating this. Thank Aljit for introducing us and being the thread that ties it all together. I also want to welcome our new friends from Pathway School who have joined us here this evening. And it's just such a joy for us to be here tonight with all of you. As if you have been paying attention, you know that our theme tonight is Paramahansa Yogananda, Uniting East and West Today. So I'd like to pick up the theme that Jyotish has been sharing with all of you. And he started tracing the history. And he mentioned in 1894 at the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad, Babaji appeared to Sri Yukteswar and said, "In the future, I will send you a disciple who you will train to disseminate Kriya Yoga in the West." And that's all he said. And then a quarter of a century later, there was a young disciple, Swami Yoganandaji at the time, who had been trained rigorously by his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar. And Yoganandaji, he was a young man. We go now to 1920. He had started a school in Ranchi, and he was meditating one morning, and he had a vision, and he saw a panorama of Western faces, and he said, "Americans, surely these are Americans." And he felt the unawakened saintly souls of Westerners calling him. Of course, as we know from the history that Jyotish outlined, this was predestined long ago, before that vision happened. And before very long, by seemingly miraculous and unrelated events, Yogananda received an invitation to come to the West to speak at a conference of religious liberals. And he had some trepidation, one can imagine. He spoke no English, he'd never been to the West, he'd lived in ashrams and been trained in the deep Vedic truths of India, and to go to the land of materialism, to go to America, it was not something he would have chosen. But he prayed. He had a ticket. He was in Calcutta. He had a ticket to on a steamer ship to go from Calcutta to Boston, and he prayed with great fervor, please, Lord, please, Divine Mother, let me feel your blessings on this undertaking. And he said, I prayed until my brain reached such an intensity I thought it would burst. Yoganandaji tells us in Autobiography of a Yogi. And at that moment, there was a knock on his door in 4 Gorpur Road in Calcutta, and he opened the door, and there was Babaji. And Babaji said, you are the one that I foretold I would send to Sri Yukteswar to bring the teachings of Kriya Yoga to the West. Go now, you have the blessings. Disseminate these truths, uniting East and West. And then on the eve of his departure, in the beautiful Guru-disciple tradition, Yoganandaji went to Sri Yukteswar, bowed at his feet, and Sri Yukteswar said to him, my child, my Chela, he said, have no fear. All doors are open for you now. He said, forget that you were born a Hindu, but don't become an American. He said, seek out and incorporate within yourself the best of all people and spread these teachings. And that is exactly what Yogananda did for the next 32 years until his passing in America. He incorporated within himself the best of the East and the West. He himself became that synthesis. And from that integrated consciousness, a wealth of teaching and behaviors and guidance poured forth, and commentaries on the scriptures of East and West, like a fountain of divine consciousness poured forth from him through that destined integration within himself. And he looked at every aspect of our lives, and he found a way to incorporate the best of East and West. And he presented them in simple and practical techniques. He addressed the subject of our health and our well-being. And he said his unique contribution to the science of yoga was the energization exercises by which we are able to, through the agency of our will, recharge our body with prana and use that prana for healing, for rejuvenation, for recharging. He devised his wonderful 9-day cleansing system. He devised his ways of fasting and exercise, and he gave a whole regime. If that's all we did was follow his techniques for health and healing, it would be a very great advantage in our life. But that was just the beginning. You know, just an aside, we have 2 good friends who live in Pune, and they have a little son, Shivam, who's 5 years old, and he's going to Waldorf school there. It's based on Rudolf Steiner's teachings. And recently, his class went to another school where there was a big athletic track, and this little 5-year-old boy started running around the track. And he ran and ran and ran, and after a while, he said, well, that's enough. The next day, our friends got a call, his father got a call from the principal of the school and said, I want you to come in. I have to talk with you about your son. And of course, the father was a little concerned that his son had gotten into trouble. So he went in, and the principal said, do you know your son, who's 5 years old, ran 7 times around a 700-meter track And our friend said, yeah, okay, so what happened? And the teacher said, no, that's what happened. I have never seen so much energy in a child that age. What are you teaching him? And our friend said, well, we do the energization exercises. And the teacher said, we must learn these. I want to teach them to all my students in my school. This is a true story. So these things, the synthesis of East and West, another area that Yogananda developed with tremendous benefit. Remember, we said he had started a school in Ranchi, and he wanted it to be a well-rounded curriculum. In India, you have the wonderful tradition of spiritual training, of the gurukuls. But Yogananda said, I wanted a kind of education that would balance all aspects, body, mind, and spirit, creative expression. And so he started this school in Ranchi. After he came to the West, he didn't have time to further this, but his great disciple, Swami Kriyanandaji, took up this banner, and he started a system of education called How to Live Schools. They're incorporated in many, many areas of America now, giving this well-rounded education that develops the integrated nature of the young child. And you may think, well, I'm not so sure about that. I've heard about those sort of schools, but how well do they score on tests? Well, at our school at Ananda Village, the high school students recently were tested in national exams, and they scored in the 98th percentile nationwide, as well as excelling in music and art and civic leadership. And so this form of education, Yogananda said, bringing together the energy and the practicality of the West with the spiritual education of the East. This is the way to form an ideal form of education. And Yogananda applied, looking at the world and the West around him, he said, these people have a lot of energy. He said, I love the spirit of America. It's, if anybody can do it, I can do it. And he said, this is the kind of energy that's needed to find God, but the energy needed to find God is the same as the energy that's needed to be successful in business. And so he wrote a whole body of literature, a wonderful book called Laws of Success. We have a book that we publish, I believe, here in India, maybe it's not out yet, called The Wisdom of Yogananda series, and it's the secrets of success and happiness. And Yogananda taught by the use of yogic concentration, focused willpower, we can achieve success in anything we set our mind to do. And Swami Kriyananda was a living example of that. His guru told him to write books. Using the power of concentration, he wrote 150 books. His guru told him to lecture. Using energy and dynamic will, he gave uncounted lectures, tens of thousands of lectures all over the world. But we shouldn't just say, oh, well, he was an extraordinary man. Yogananda came to show us that success is not random. We are not victims of our fate, of our upbringing, but that we can find success in our lives by applying these principles. Very simple: concentration, dedication, focus. Yogananda was very good friends in America in the early 1930s with some of the great captains of industry, Henry Ford, and he went to Detroit and visited him. And Yogananda tells us that it was actually he himself who gave Henry Ford the idea to put the gear shift on the steering wheel before it had just been on the floor. That was Yogananda's idea. Something as simple and practical as that. But he was trying to show us that success is not separate from a spiritual life. His most advanced disciple, Rajarsi Janakananda, was a self-made millionaire and a great yogi who experienced deep states, the deepest states of samadhi. So success in the world around us. Yogananda also looked at using a vision and integrating East and Western values. He looked at the family life and around him. And he looked at the life in America and he said, it's rather closed. He used the expression, us four and no more, meaning closed unit and not thinking of others. And so he, thinking about the more extended family in India, thinking about the beautiful villages in India where people help each other, at least in the past this was true, he came up with the ideal of world brotherhood colonies, which would be an extended family, which would show that life is much more fulfilling when we don't just think about taking care of our own, but when we think about our neighbors equally as ourselves. And my husband and I, Jyotish and I, have had the great blessing of living in Ananda World Brotherhood community in America, in California, since its beginning in 1968 and 69. And I have seen a way of life there that one assumes is not possible in this world. A few years ago, a very fine Swami from Rishikesh came to visit us, Swami Shankarananda, and we were showing him around, and he said, you can't say that Ananda is like an Indian village. Ananda is like an ancient Vedic village where high principles and concern for others and the search for God are the first and foremost. So Yogananda again looked at the world around him and he said, how can we bring together the best of East and West? And he tried to start these communities, but the time was such, it was after World War II, where there was a lot of people were looking for security. They weren't sure of being able to expand. So although he tried to start them, the time was not right. So it was left again to his great disciple, Swami Kriyanandaji, to bring forth this movement of World Brotherhood colonies. And what a beautiful job what a beautiful expression this has given to the world. I can't tell you, I could go on for quite a long time telling you the impact that Ananda has had on the world. But it's really, it has given hope, it has given inspiration, it has given the thought that people can live according to their ideals. And it gives people faith that all this is possible on a very practical, real level, not just theory, but living it for 45 years. That is, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Well, people have been enjoying this wonderful community life for a long time. And now here in India, we're starting one outside of Pune. And we hope you can all visit us there. It's just beginning. But I believe with the deep spirituality that we find here in India, I think this movement will grow very quickly. And finally, Yogananda brought, as he said, I came to the West and I brought the cream of the teachings of yoga. And then I presented them to my students. And I presented them in such a way that they could practice them in their daily lives. And when Yoganandaji went back to India in 1936, his guru was a little bit unsure of what he was doing. He said, but you're changing a little bit how I taught you. And Yoganandaji touched his feet and he said, Master, you are like the goldsmith. You mine the pure ore. I am like the jeweler. I take this gold and I fashion it in such a way that people can wear it. And when he put it in such a way, Sri Yukteswar said, I accept what you do. And so Yogananda brought, as it was destined, the science of Kriya Yoga. And he wrote lessons and disseminated these teachings, and he spoke all across America. And so from that point in time, the meeting of East and West, predestined from long ago, coming down through this line, focusing on our Guru Deva, Yogananda Ji, to bring these teachings in all these very, very practical ways. This new birth, a renaissance has come about, and it's just beginning. And we can see it in America. We can see that the consciousness is beginning to change, and the acceptance of true spirituality is happening. Recently, in August, we had the opportunity to visit some of Yogananda's shrines in Los Angeles. And we went to Mount Washington, which is where he established his headquarters outside of Los Angeles. And there is a wishing well. For those of you who have read Swamiji Kriyananda's autobiography, he talks about that wishing well and how he was there Swami was there when they installed it. And there's an interesting story I won't go into, but we stood there and we looked at the well, and around it was concrete. And Yogananda Ji had put his handprints are in there, and also the handprints of his closest woman disciple, Sister Gyanamata. And next to Yogananda's hands, and such beautiful hands he had, such power, such grace, you could see it in the prints. And he wrote, to this in the concrete, and I had never seen it before, though I had visited before. He wrote in the concrete, to this cause I give my hands, my feet, my soul, and I pray that all will do the same. And so those of us who are here, who have been touched by his teachings, let us feel that power of Yogananda empowering us to continue the work that he started, that Kriyananda Ji has furthered, and that all of us now, East and West, can come together and bring about a unity in the world that will be one of the most positive forces for integration and change and upliftment of our planet today. God bless you.
Soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay.